Thank you for tuning into the Island Treasures podcast. We value the insights shared by our guests and hosts, but it's important to note that their personal experiences are intended to inform and encourage, and not to replace professional, legal, or medical advice. With that, we are ready for today's exciting episode. Welcome to Island Treasures, a place for caregivers to hear encouragement from other caregivers, who by sharing their experiences offer helpful information and resources for your caregiving journey. This podcast is brought to you by Alongside Caregiver Consulting, and I'm your host and caregiver consultant, Alison Van Schie from beautiful Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada. Today's caregiving story is told from the perspective of one receiving care. It gives a unique insight into the challenges and experiences faced by those who rely on others for support. At the age of 32, my guest's world turned upside down, physically, emotionally, and cognitively, when she experienced a cardiac arrest. As a social worker, she had been working in the field of geriatrics, and now, with her unique perspective, she has valuable insights that she wishes to share with us today. So join me now as I welcome Jenna Rumberger. Welcome, Jenna. I'm so excited to have you as a guest on the Island Treasures podcast today.
Thank you so much, Allison. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's always great to talk to a social worker. I think there's just a comfort level for me, being a former social worker myself.
Absolutely, I agree. Thank you.
So to find out that you are a social worker and that you have a caregiving story, Jenna, let's hear about your caregiving story before we go on to your social work services.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wanted to talk about how I was actually a care recipient and not a caregiver. So,
Ooh.
yes, which I never expected, never had even thought about, even though I work in geriatrics and I work with caregivers. But last summer, I had a sudden and unexpected cardiac arrest in the middle of the night. And luckily, my husband was there. He found me, called 911, performed CPR, and the paramedics were able to arrive to our apartment really quickly. And so they were able to perform emergency treatment, which was getting a defibrillator to shock my heart. And then they needed to intubate me, which is sticking the tube down to help with your breathing. And then I was transported to a local hospital and put in the intensive care unit and in a medically induced coma for a couple days. So last summer, I was only 32 years old. It was completely unexpected. I had absolutely no risk factors or any type of warnings, no family history of cardiac arrest. So it was just completely out of nowhere, completely sudden. And so the story is really about how my husband became my short-term caregiver.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. Kind of shocking. I'm a little shocked right now, Jenna. To be a care recipient and a heart attack survivor at such a young age. Like, your experience now will be always framed by that when you're working with caregivers.
Absolutely. Yes. And just to clarify, it was a cardiac arrest and not a heart attack. So those are actually two separate issues, but people often confuse them. So a cardiac arrest is when your heart, it's an electrical issue. So it's when your heart completely stops beating. So if you're awake, a person will just collapse. But in my case, I was sleeping. So there wasn't a big sudden noise. I didn't stand and fall to the ground. I was sleeping. And so a cardiac arrest, like I mentioned, is an electrical issue versus a heart attack is when there's a blockage in the artery. So a heart attack, a person is still awake, they can breathe, they can communicate, but cardiac arrests are fatal. So if you don't get treatment, you will die.
Oh, even more intense in my shock now. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, so intense. And that was really what had happened to me is that I did clinically die for a couple minutes because my heart had stopped. I wasn't breathing. And so the noise that woke my husband up, you might be familiar when somebody is going through the dying process, when they stop breathing, they make a really kind of alarming noise because it sounds like almost like a fish out of water or almost sounds like gasping for air. And that's just the natural process of dying. And so that was the noise that woke my husband up, and he was like, "Whoa, I've never heard that sound before. That is so weird." And then, of course, I was completely unresponsive. So that's what happened.
When you woke up after your coma and everything, were
Mhm.
you in disbelief?
So I actually have no memory at all of the first maybe 10 to 14 days I was in the hospital. So I don't even remember coming out of the coma. I really just have stories from my husband and my family being there with me, and they filled me in about what had happened. And so I think the doctor said that that's pretty normal. A lot of people who survive cardiac arrest, they really just don't remember. Sometimes I didn't remember the day leading up to it, and then I didn't remember the first 10 to 14 days, but I was so confused. So I basically had no short-term memory at all. So I
Mm.
was repeating myself every couple minutes. Where am I? What happened? Why am I here? What's going on? There are all these buttons and cords and things connected to my body, and I was just so confused.
Yeah, because you were fine before it happened. And that would be the last thing you remembered was being fine before it happened.
Yeah, I was just a pretty healthy 32-year-old person with no health problems.
So now do you have to be careful in what you do? Like, is there a risk to you?
So, part of my treatment, I got a defibrillator implanted. So, it's inside of my body connected to my heart. And so, that is my insurance or my safety. So, if my heart stops again and I have another cardiac arrest, then luckily the machine, the defibrillator inside me, it'll go off and it'll shock my heart so I won't die. So that's very helpful that I'll have that for the rest of my life inside my body.
Okay. Well, you are teaching me in ways that I didn't expect to be taught yet today.
Yeah,
No.
I mean, science and medicine is so advanced. It's so great that we have these tools and these systems in place to save people.
Well, and how fortunate that you weren't alone when it happened.
Yes, exactly. I think some statistics say that people who have a cardiac arrest outside of the hospital, so whether it's at home or out in the community, about 90 to 93% of people die. So only 7 to 10%, which is the number I'm in, actually survive. And of course, that's because my husband was there. And
Yeah.
so he was right next to me and able to respond. But unfortunately, a lot of people are alone and don't have the help.
Oh, wow.
Mhm.
So this medical emergency, I
Mhm.
understand, changed the direction of where you were going with your work.
Yes, it really did. So, at the time, I was working as a geriatric case manager, and I was under a lot of stress. And I had this idea for maybe a couple years to try to start my own private practice, doing therapy and consultation. But I really didn't have the time or the capacity to dedicate to doing that while I was working with the government here in Seattle area. But thankfully, there were some good things that came out of my cardiac arrest. So I was on medical leave for about 6 months, which I really did need because my recovery took many months.
Mm.
Um, and I decided that it was time to open my own private practice. And so that's what I did a couple months back in January of this year.
So that's a lot of change.
Yeah.
You were happily going along. You were being a social worker. You were serving geriatric population, demographic, and then you had this cardiac arrest. And you totally shifted. Like we've all had to pivot because of the COVID pandemic, but you had to pivot a different way after the COVID pandemic with your own personal story. So you saw this as the opportunity to do that. And moving forward, now serving, well, you tell me what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really thankful that I have this opportunity to open my private practice and go into business because I know it's quite a struggle. But I started my own private practice called Aging with a Plan, and I provide individual therapy and consultation for older adults and family caregivers who are impacted by chronic illness. And I really have a specialization and a passion for memory loss and dementia specifically. So, on the therapy side of things, I can support older adults and caregivers who are impacted by anxiety, by depression, stress and burnout, and grief and loss. And then the consultation side of things is really the practical aspects of aging and caregiving. So, giving information and guidance around in home services, or if someone is not able to stay in their home, what is a higher level of care? What are the different retirement communities or long-term care communities? And then also the planning stage, so advanced care planning and reviewing end-of-life options.
So pretty much the whole meal deal for caregivers and the elderly population. So if you don't mind, I'd love for you, with your expertise, to speak more about the burnout and the stress that causes burnout with caregivers.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an important conversation. So I see a lot with caregivers is that they try to take on all of the responsibilities or all the tasks themselves. And that can lead, as we know, to burnout. And when I talk about burnout, I mean when you're just so physically, emotionally, mentally exhausted, even if you are able to sleep, but you're just so worn down, so spread thin, so exhausted that you just have a lot of negative feelings, and it could lead to also physical symptoms as well. And as we know, burnout is not sustainable, it's not healthy. It could lead to a caregiver having their own health problems as well. And we don't want that to happen, of course. So, unfortunately, burnout is very, very common amongst caregivers, but I really think that it's not the caregiver's fault. I think that at least here in the United States, like we just don't have enough resources and enough attention really given to both caregivers and care recipients.
Yeah, I think you're right. Caregivers do feel that they need to do it all themselves. They just take on that responsibility. I've heard it described as the Groundhog Day of caregiving. You say you finished a full day of providing supports for someone, you're exhausted, you go to bed, you get a few hours of sleep, you're kind of listening to hear your loved one in the middle of the night. Hate to say that to you, but in the middle of the night, and then you get up the next day and you have to start it all over again. And caregivers do. And if they're not able to look after themselves or aren't aware of the signs of the high stress and burnout, then that can lead to burnout.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my belief, just like we talk about raising a child, it takes a village, I feel that way with caregiving too. I think that it's really helpful for caregivers to try to acknowledge that they don't have to do everything by themselves, that they can build a community of whether it's family, friends, neighbors. Support groups are extremely helpful for caregivers as well. So, other people that you can lean on and rely on. It's so important to get the help that you deserve and that you really need as a caregiver.
So do you help folks recognize the signs that they're heading towards burnout?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people are aware of the signs, but they might just not be putting all those dots together, all those puzzle pieces together. They might acknowledge, like, wow, I am extremely irritable and I'm yelling at my mom when I don't usually do that. And it's like, well, let's look at what's going on here. Have you been sleeping? Are you eating well-balanced meals? Have you been able to take time to exercise? Or do an activity that you really love. And usually all the answers to those questions are no. And so it makes sense that you're super irritable, super exhausted, just so fatigued and unable to really cope. I mean, it just all makes sense. So I think people are aware of burnout, but it's really about trying to put all those puzzle pieces together, connecting the dots.
I like that. Connecting the dots. Put that on your resume. I am an expert dot connector.
Dot connector, I like that a lot.
Uh, so Jenna, you've been a care recipient. You're
Yeah.
now in private practice as a social worker, and I'm still thinking that there might be a caregiving story that is in your history. Would you care to share a little bit more about what you have observed of caregiving?
Yeah, absolutely. So I myself have not been a direct caregiver, but I have observed both of my parents who were long distance caregivers. And my dad was previously a long distance caregiver for his mom. And my mom right now is currently a long distance caregiver for her mom. So my mom's mom, or my grandma, she's living with advanced Alzheimer's disease, and she's been sick for a number of years. And I observed my mom doing a lot of, the long distance caregiving tasks. So she's on the computer and on the phone at least a couple times a week, trying to coordinate care, whether it's with the doctor, the social worker. She lives in a memory care facility, so getting updates from the staff. And one of the biggest issues right now is that my grandma is losing a significant amount of weight, because what happens with people with Alzheimer's or different forms of dementia is they have a lot of difficulty over time with chewing and swallowing food and just having a really low appetite. So they just don't really feel hungry that often. And that, of course, could lead to somebody dying. So I observed my mom really on the phone and on the computer coordinating care. Sometimes she's buying things for my grandma. So she lost a lot of weight. Her pants didn't fit her anymore. So they needed to order 2 pairs of spandex pants for my grandma. They needed to order Ensure for her. Luckily, she is able to drink Ensure, which has a lot of nutrition and calories, which is helpful. But those are some of the things I observed with my mom and my dad, who are long distance caregivers. And it was also really interesting because my parents never referred to themselves as a long distance caregiver. And so I thought it was really interesting to talk to them about that, because my mom always said, well, I'm not physically in Ohio with my mom. I'm not physically there in the memory care unit. I'm not helping her with all of her activities of daily living, all of the bathing and the dressing and the cleaning. And I said, yes, that's true. And also, look at how much time and energy you are spending on the computer and on the phone. You're communicating with the hospice nurse, with the memory care staff at least once or twice a week to get updates about grandma and how her mood is, how her appetite is, how is her sleep. You buy things online, you communicate with the family so everyone's kept in the loop as to what's going on with grandma. And so I think it took a few conversations for my mom to acknowledge, like, oh, yeah, I am actually doing a lot for grandma. So I thought that that's something that comes up a lot actually in caregiving, is people don't either they don't recognize or relate to that term caregiver, or they're not really giving themselves credit for everything that they are doing for their loved one.
And that's huge. I think when we can actually recognize that we are caregiving, even from afar, and recognize that what we're doing is valuable. Like your mom is coordinating, by the sounds of it. She's coordinating so many things for your grandma. And I was actually going to say, I would imagine that you're quite the resource for your mom in her role as long distance caregiver, but you went one step further and actually helped her realize that, oh yeah, maybe I am a long distance caregiver. But having a Jenna in her back pocket must be a real relief for her in her caregiving role.
Yeah, it is really helpful. And it's nice that I can try to provide some support to my mom and my family.
And were you not able to recently visit your grandma?
Yes. Oh my gosh, you remembered. Yes, we actually just went to Ohio. My whole family and I got to visit with my grandma, which was so nice. I hadn't seen her in over a year, so I had never seen her living in the memory care facility. And we really thought that she was close to dying in February because
Oh,
there was a COVID outbreak at the memory care facility, and she did get COVID, and they were following the CDC guidelines. And the isolation in itself, I thought, could do it because she was alone in her own room. And of course, the caregivers would come in and provide meals and care and support to her. But I was really worried because she was spending almost all of her time sleeping and barely eating anything, and of course, losing a lot of weight. And so I was thinking, this is our time to prepare. Grandma could be passing away pretty soon. Luckily, she did not pass away. We all made it to the trip to see her in March, and we were able to celebrate her 95th birthday
wow.
together, which was
Nice.
incredible. And so we were there at the memory care facility with her, and we brought ice cream, which she really still enjoys. She still has her sweet tooth, which is great. So even though my grandma, she does not recognize us, she has no idea who we are, she is still in pretty good spirits, all things considered. And it's really sweet because the staff where she lives, they say that she's really affectionate and she loves holding hands and she loves getting hugs. And that's not the grandma that I knew growing
Oh,
up. She was not very affectionate with us. Not to say that she was completely closed off, but she's just become way more lovey-dovey, way more affectionate. And so that's kind of a blessing in disguise with the disease.
yeah. And interesting that you recognize that. But you did bring ice cream. That could have been a little bit of a influencer for her.
Definitely. Yeah, that made her happy for sure.
I love that things such as ice cream bring such joy because it is the joy in the moment that speaks so loudly to them, which I love.
Yeah, absolutely. I think food, music, animals, these are all tools that can be really, really powerful and really meaningful for someone living with Alzheimer's or dementia.
And with your grandma, someone to hold their hand and be affectionate with.
Yeah, she
That's really
loved that.
sweet. Yeah, very sweet.
Thank you.
Yeah. But yes, I did remember because your trip was part of our scheduling. It was like I
Oh,
must go visit my grandma. And
yes, yes.
good. I'm glad you did. And happy belated birthday to her.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
95. Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm starting to think what number I'm aiming for, and I'm not sure 95 is it.
I don't think I have a number in mind. It's really to me about like what will my quality of life look like and what will I be able to do? What will I not be able to do? And will I have a life that's worth living for, that's meaningful to me? So those are kind of the things I think about as I age, not necessarily a number.
No, but it is good to think of that. And with the social work perspective of advanced care planning, it's really good to get the conversations out there. Like, you've already started about, well, if my quality of life is what would govern your decisions. And for me, it has been a bit of a number, but I'm always a numbers person, even though I don't do mathematics very well. But advanced care planning is a huge part of what I do. And I'm gathering that it's a huge part of what you are doing and offering as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was honestly my one tip or my one takeaway that I really wanted to talk about at this podcast. And I think my personal story of having the cardiac arrest just proves that no matter what your age is or what your health status is, we just never, never know when we're going to have a medical emergency. And that's why I really encourage everyone, whether it's in my private practice or my personal life, please start having these conversations now, sooner rather than later. Please let your family or your loved ones know what type of medical treatment you would want if you couldn't communicate your own decision. So if you, for example, were in a serious car accident or you had a stroke and you were in a coma and you couldn't communicate your wishes, let your family know what you would want. So, for example, with myself, when I had CPR, my ribs were cracked. And that was so painful during my recovery. It probably took about 8 weeks or so for my ribs to heal. And then, of course, when you're intubated, you get this thing stuck down your throat. And so my voice was completely changed for a couple months. And so my volume was really, really low. I couldn't talk loudly, and my throat was very, very scratchy. And so this is just part of the side effects or the downside to getting this life-saving treatment. So I always think for myself, if I was really sick, if I had a terminal illness or cancer, would I want CPR? Would I want it to be resuscitated? Would I want all these life-saving treatments? And I don't know if I would. And so I would want to talk to my doctor and my healthcare team and ask them, like, what are the pros and cons to all these treatments? What's the likelihood that I could recover? Or would I be in a lot of pain? Because that's one of my personal goals of care, is that as I age, I really don't want to be in a lot of pain. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. And so that's kind of the question I think about too, is if I have a diagnosis or a medical treatment, how much pain is this going to cause, and what's the likelihood that I can recover? And so those are the type of questions we want to ask ourselves when we're thinking about advanced care planning.
Yeah, your perspective is completely different because you've been there already and you've hopefully got a long life ahead of you, and hopefully the recovery, it's pain-free.
Yeah.
Having the tube, being intubated, like there are things that could go wrong with that, and you might not have had a voice when you came out of that. And again, that's another factor. If you don't have your voice, literally, you would have still been able to write down your wishes, but sometimes with a stroke, you're not able to do that. So yeah, these conversations are really important, even if they're not verbal conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anybody listening, if you're wondering where you can start with advanced care planning, I just want to give a shout out to a really great nonprofit organization called the Conversation Project. So you can go to theconversationproject.org. And you can find a bunch of really helpful resources and tools to get started with advanced care planning. So they have multiple guides. One's called the Conversation Starter Guide, and that's for yourself to really sit down and ask yourself what matters to you. And they have a list of questions and prompts that you can fill out so you can kind of gather your thoughts about what type of medical wishes you might want. And then you can prepare yourself to talk to your loved ones about it. And then they have free templates for you to actually complete the documents. So with advanced care planning for healthcare, the two most common documents are your living will. So what type of medical treatment do you want? Like the CPR, being intubated. And then there's also the durable power of attorney for healthcare. And that's when you appoint an agent or an advocate to act on your behalf if you were ever incapacitated or unable to speak for yourself.
Great resource. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course, you're welcome.
So conversationproject.org.
Yes, theconversationproject.org, and it's all free, it's all accessible. You can download it. I believe they have the tools also in multiple languages as
Mm.
well.
Well, that's a true social worker, knowing resources and offering them and finding free resources. Even better, Jenna.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that was your number one takeaway or thing that you wanted to share with the listeners today. What's your number two?
Ooh, I did not write it down. That was my one most important takeaway, is advanced care planning, regardless of your health or age. I think the other takeaway too for caregivers is to try to build your community, to try to find support, because you cannot do this alone. It is not sustainable to take on 100% of the caregiving tasks and responsibilities yourself, and you shouldn't have to either. So there are so many ways you can get support, whether it's delegating specific tasks to people that are in your area or your loved ones, your family, friends, neighbors, and saying, hey, I'm really needing help with grocery shopping. Do you have capacity to help me go grocery shopping? one day a week. I can give you a list. I can give you the money. Would you be able to go to the store and then come to my home to drop off the groceries? Any of the tasks that you feel as a caregiver you could take off of your plate would be so helpful. So oftentimes the common tasks could be going to the grocery store. It can be taking your loved one to a medical appointment if you can drive them to and from the appointment. Or sometimes it's even just coming over. Hey, can you come over and sit with mom for 2 hours? I just need a little bit of alone time. So, asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's really a sign of strength and a sign of building your community, your circle of people who can support you and your loved one.
I agree. Asking for help for whatever reason seems to be really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And why do you feel like it's so difficult?
Like I wrote an article one time for caregiving.com that explored why it's so difficult to ask for help. And the article was called Asking for Help to Relieve Caregiver Stress. And in it, I explored my own personal reasons for not asking for help in an everyday situation. And of course, I related it to caregivers as well. But it's so difficult.
It is really difficult. And I feel like I can kind of relate when I needed help too during my recovery. I felt kind of embarrassed and ashamed to ask for help because here I was only 32 years old. I considered myself very independent and I really wasn't the same person during my recovery. I had cognitive issues, so I had short-term memory loss. I was really confused when I went to medical appointments. I had difficulty with my speech. When I would drink water or eat food, I was coughing things up all the time, which is another side effect of being intubated. And then I had mobility issues. So when I was on my feet, like I was really dizzy, I was very weak. I had lost about 20 pounds while I was in the hospital, very deconditioned, and I was pretty unbalanced on my feet because I needed to do physical therapy and occupational therapy. And I just felt so frustrated by the process. My body had completely changed. And I knew things were going to get better, but sometimes it's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel when you're just really different physically, cognitively, emotionally. I mean, your world is turned upside down. So I can understand why people have a hard time asking for help because sometimes it does feel embarrassing or shameful to say, you know what, I can't do the tasks that I used to do by myself. And now I need somebody to help me do them. And so I think that's something that needs to be recognized and talked about is why do you feel that way? And trying to unlearn those negative or unhelpful thinking patterns because I think that caregiving and life in general is all about community, building connections with other people, being able to support each other because life is complicated. Caregiving is complicated. It's a roller coaster. There are so many ups and downs and so many unexpected turns. We just don't know how things are going to go. And there's absolutely no shame in asking for help. And so I think that that is definitely something that I went through myself and something that I see also with my clients in private practice.
No, thank you for that. And I think you nailed it when you said asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. We need to convey that message to
Yes, I
everyone.
completely agree. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I
you
think
nailed it.
that's so important that asking for help, being vulnerable, being honest, those are absolutely signs of strength.
That they are foreign to us. I think that's
Yes.
probably a big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in general, our society doesn't really promote or honor those qualities. And it's a very independent, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, just do the best that you can, just go, 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 hustle, 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 work, work, work.
And don't bother me.
Yes, that too.
But no, having your radar on as to who has offered to help, those are the people that you ask for help. Like if someone said, let me know if there's something I can do.
Yeah, one of the most helpful things during my recovery, which I would definitely recommend to anyone and everyone, is my sister organized a meal train.
Mm.
And so it's actually a website. So my sister made an account for us on this meal train website, and she emailed it to all of our family and friends. And then our family and friends were able to sign up for a specific day and a specific, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And a lot of my family and friends don't live in the area, they live in other states. And so they were organizing food delivered to our apartment. And that was a huge weight off of our shoulders because all those tasks were put on my husband for a couple months. So all the cooking, cleaning, taking care of the dog. I wasn't allowed to drive for 6 months, so he had to take me to and from all of my medical appointments, which were multiple appointments a week. And so having family and friends do the meal train and sending us food was a lifesaver. It was so helpful.
That is awesome.
Yeah, I loved it. So I highly recommend that for anyone if you're looking to try to help someone, especially there's sometimes that guilt of, oh, I don't live in the same town or the same city as my person who really needs support right now. There are other ways you can help, whether it's emotional support, text messages, phone calls, or organizing a meal train is a really helpful task too.
So you'd prefer that to receiving bouquets of flowers?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, people sent me flowers, which are really, really thoughtful. I love looking at flowers, but to me, I want to think about practical things. What are like practical things you can help with? Everyone needs to eat. I love to eat. I had lost so much weight, so I needed to gain back this weight and get my strength up. So having the food delivered to us was extremely helpful for both me and my husband.
So I don't know if you've heard of the book, The Badass Advocate by Erin Gallion.
I
Have you
have
heard of?
not.
Okay, so she talks about building the support team, and it's about patient advocacy. And
Mm.
she was the first one who introduced the meal train idea to me in her book. And hearing you actually talk about the experience of being a recipient of the meal train coordination is fabulous. So, Erin's book is a great resource that I see people almost fight over when I bring it out. So it's
Oh, that's
a great
great.
tool.
I'll have to look that up. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. The Badass Advocate. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
But hearing you talk about the meal train, it sounds like it was a real godsend for you, like just to have the nutrition and to also allow folks who were long distance feel like they were participating and contributing to your well-being. And I think that was
Yeah, it
beautiful.
meant so much to us. It was extremely helpful.
Do you have a website for the meal train, Jenna?
Yes, so it looks like you can go to mealtrain.com and then you can get started for free and make a page if you're looking to help a friend or family with meals.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All about resources.
Definitely.
So, Jenna, do you have any other takeaways from your experience as a care recipient that you'd like to share with the listeners?
I guess a takeaway message from being a care recipient, something that was hard for me was learning to communicate with my husband and my family. And so it was important for me to remember that they cannot read my mind. So if I'm having a
Oh,
hard time or if I'm having a question, I really needed to communicate and speak up because no one can read my mind. They don't know how I'm feeling or what I'm thinking. And so I think that's a good takeaway is just being open to conversation and remember to communicate and let your person know what's going on and also really having patience. So for myself, I've felt impatient with my recovery process. Why is this taking so long? I'm not back to how I was before, but hey, you almost died. So it's okay. This is going to take some time for you to heal again. And being patient with your loved one who is your caregiver. This is a brand new role, a brand new experience. This is a major change in your relationship. My husband was my husband and my best friend, and now he's my caregiver. Like, that was a huge shift in the dynamic of our relationship. And so I think that that's a good reminder for people too, is just to be patient with yourself and be patient with the other person, whether it's your caregiver or the person that you're providing care to.
Yeah. And you said your husband was very patient with you, very loving and kind.
Extremely.
He wanted you to be healed.
Yes,
Get
yes.
this recovery as fast as possible.
Yeah. And he never pushed me to recover as fast as possible. I think that he was just so thankful I was alive because
Mm.
for the initial 1 hour period, he thought that I had died, or for the initial maybe 2 days while I was in the hospital. Um, all the doctors have to do that differential diagnosis. And so initially they run through a laundry list of all these other problems. Well, we don't know if she had a stroke in addition to the cardiac arrest. We don't know if she had a seizure. She might have permanent brain damage. She might not be the Jenna that you used to know. She might not be able to work again. I mean, there were just so many unknowns at the beginning. And so he was just so thankful that I was alive, and he could see how much I was improving every single day, even if I couldn't see it because, well, I couldn't remember the first 10 to 14 days because I had no idea what I was like at the beginning. But I think for yourself, you're always your own worst critic. And so you're always kind of beating yourself up like, oh, why can't I get up and walk to the bathroom by myself? This is just so frustrating. So thankfully, my husband was very, very patient and understanding with me.
What a roller coaster for him that first 24, 48 hours, though, to be bombarded with all these scenarios. Well, what if? What if this is going to happen? What if she doesn't recover? What if she doesn't wake up? Like,
Hmm.
just so much. So
Yeah.
you have quite the story to tell with that. Like, and what a platform, like you say, to use to promote advanced care planning for people. What a platform, Jenna.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's probably one of the most important things from my experience is that I want to be able to help other people. Really want to raise awareness and spread information, especially about advanced care planning, because of course in our society, we really don't talk about death and dying very much. It's still very stigmatized. It's very scary. It's the unknown. But we can do so many helpful things to prepare ourselves to prepare our families. And so advanced care planning's having these difficult conversations now rather than when you're in that medical emergency and you're in crisis and all your emotions are heightened. It's really the best gift that you can give your family is to have these conversations to get your documents and all your ducks in order.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to talk a little bit more about counseling. You're a licensed therapist, correct?
Yeah, so my credential is an LICSW, so it's Licensed Independent Clinical Social Worker, and that's here in Washington State.
And if someone wants to reach out to you, would you provide online supports, Jenna?
Yes, I do. And I work with only people that live in Washington
Okay.
State. So that is a limitation because of my social work license and my business license. But if you live in Washington State and if you are looking for support, whether it's emotional support with therapy or the practical support with consultation, you can go to my website at agingwithaplan.org and you can book a free introduction phone call, which is 20 minutes for us to really talk to each other and for me to hear what you're looking for and for you to learn about me and see if we might be a good fit. And if we're not a good fit, no pressure at all. I can absolutely try to point you in the right direction and try to find you someone who's a better fit.
So if someone comes to you who's depressed and that's not they're coming with another reason that they want to talk to you about something and you recognize that they're depressed, what would you do with them?
Yeah, so I think it's about trying to help the person recognize their symptoms. And it's okay if they don't want to use that term depression. Everyone has a different label or a way to describe their symptoms or how they're feeling. But like I mentioned before, it's really trying to connect all those dots. So to provide education and support to that person, really meeting them where they're at in their journey.
Love it. And that's When I first met you, Jenna, it was because you were speaking a language that was so familiar to me, the social work language. And it was like, this young gal is saying things that I say. Like, this is awesome. So,
I love
um,
that.
yeah, it's true. And that's why I was drawn to you initially. So, for other people who might want to be drawn to you, would you mind sharing how they can find you on social media?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Aging with a Plan. And my website is agingwithaplan.org. And I have a free handout on my website if anyone wants to take a look. So it's on the front page at the bottom, and you can click get the free handout. And what the free handout is it says, "Are you ready for a medical emergency?" So it's really a checklist or a suggestion on how you can create a face sheet. So it could be for yourself or it can be for your family member. So you want to be prepared before the medical emergency happens. So that's having all your contact information, your health insurance card, emergency contacts. If you already have your power of attorney documents, having a copy listed there. If you have a living will and there's specific medical wishes you want the doctors to follow, it's basically having all the checklist or your face sheet, all of your medications that you take, what medical conditions do you have? If you have specific care preferences, do you use any specific durable medical equipment? So for example, a walker, a cane, a wheelchair. Do you have hearing aids? Do you wear eyeglasses? All of the really important information, you could call it a face sheet. That's my free handout is listed on my website.
I think that's a free handout of major value. That sounds wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, great idea. A great resource.
A great resource. Yes, definitely. Because that can be helpful for you or your loved one to plan ahead of time, get everything together in one place, because when you or your loved one goes to the emergency room, it is so overwhelming. And the doctors are saying, okay, what medical conditions does this person have? What medications do they take? What vitamins do they take? Who's the emergency contact? Who's the power of attorney? And you're like, whoa, 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 this is a lot. And so this is a free handout with all of those things listed in a checklist. You can create your own portable binder to have at your fingertips so that when a medical emergency happens, you have all of your information stored in one place that's easily accessible.
And make it a binder that looks different from all the other binders in your house. If you're anything like me, they're all the same looking, but it would be great to have one that's like a different color that's just for those
Labeled.
emergencies. Yeah, awesome.
Yes, absolutely.
So this is great. Is there a personal tidbit you wouldn't mind sharing with the listeners, Jenna?
Oh, so something that's not related to what I've been talking about, but I myself, I love dogs. So I wanted to talk about how much of a dog lover that I am. And so my husband and I, we have a long-haired dachshund. Her name is Madge, and she's a sweetheart. And she definitely helped me during my recovery since I was at home for 6 months. And so she stayed with me on the couch for many, many weeks and cuddled with me. And I absolutely love dogs. And I think in my work as well, working with older adults or people living with dementia, I've seen how powerful the connection can be with animals. It doesn't have to be a dog, but at one of my previous workplaces, they had a volunteer group who would bring ponies into our adult day health center, and it was amazing. I absolutely loved it. It was just so sweet to watch people. I mean, first, you're amazed that you see a miniature horse, right, inside of a building. I mean, how often do you see that? But also, just like the connection that people would make when they were petting or looking at the pony, it was just so powerful and so sweet. And so, I really think that animals can have a really meaningful and healing presence to almost anyone. But for myself, I'm a huge dog lover.
And how old is Madge?
She's about 10 years old. So
Ooh,
she's a senior herself.
yeah, yeah, yeah. A senior, and she was a caregiver.
She
She
was
was
one of my
caring for you.
caregivers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
seriously, a dog or a pet can be part of your team.
Oh, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's a great tidbit. That's lovely. Do you have anything else you'd like to add before we conclude today?
I would just like to say that if you are a caregiver out there, please remember that you are not alone. Our systems are not set up to support you in the way that you deserve. And so I really do hope that you can find a community of people to lean on, especially finding caregiver support groups. There are so many online and in person, and it can be really powerful and really helpful when you talk to other people who are also on this caregiver journey, and you can really relate, you can really vent, you can get resources or encouragement from other people who have been in similar situations as you. So I really hope that you know you're not alone, your feelings matter. This is a really hard experience. There are going to be ups and downs, and it's a brand new experience. So many caregivers, they didn't expect to become caregivers, they didn't ask to be caregivers, but it is a journey that so many people can relate to. So I do hope you can find your community of people that can be there to support you. And another really helpful tidbit too is like if you have a trusted family member or friend who can be your advocate in the hospital, if you cannot really advocate for yourself, oh, so important. Like I didn't know in the moment, but I had found out afterwards that my mom, I was in so much pain. I'm just sitting there in my bed, just like crying, crying, saying, in my voice, someone help me, someone help me, someone help me. And my mom was able to pull my nurse aside and say, like, can you talk to the doctor? Can you give her at least a little bit of pain medication? In this case, like, I really think it's appropriate for her to have some pain meds just for a little bit because I couldn't sleep. I was barely eating. Like, they want you to get out of the hospital as fast as medically possible, right? And so if you can't participate in physical therapy or occupational therapy, you can't sleep, you can't eat, like you're gonna prolong your hospital stay, right? And so my mom was like, it's kind of in your benefit too. And so luckily, like I was given some pain meds for a couple of days, and that helped significantly. I was able to sleep, I was able to eat, I could do all my rehab. So having an advocate in your corner who could really help you is a helpful thing too. And then another tidbit is when you are in the hospital or your loved one is in the hospital, always ask for the social worker's contact information or whoever the discharge planner is. Here in Washington State, our discharge planners are either social workers or their nurse case managers. In my case, I had to go to two different hospitals because I needed to go to inpatient rehab. And the first hospital where I was, they did not have any beds available. So that meant that I needed to go to a second hospital. And with our health insurance, that requires pre-authorization. And so about a month or two after I finished my hospital stays, I got a letter from my health insurance company saying, hey, we're not covering the cost of 2 days of your hospital stay, which is so stressful. And so, of course, you need to appeal that letter. And the way that I did that was I had the contact information for the hospital social worker. And I said, hey, can you help me either reach out to the doctor or help explain why we need to appeal this denial? Because it's not appropriate for me as the patient to pay out of pocket for 2 days of the hospital stay. So it's so, so, so important to be your own advocate and get that contact information for your discharge planner or your social worker in the hospital so that they can help you with if you have an appeal from your health insurance company.
That's awesome. And social workers are such a great resource in the healthcare system, in the community, but often they're not thought of right away. Well, thank you for sharing your time with us today, Jenna, and your story. Like you did blow me away at the beginning as a care recipient, and what a takeaway.
Thank
What a
you.
message you have. So thank you for sharing that today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Allison.
Jenna gave us a lot to think about. Drawing from her personal journey and professional role as a social worker, she emphasizes the critical role of advanced care planning. She believes it is crucial to make provisions for future healthcare decisions based on her experiences, and to get us started, she introduced the free resource for us all to check out at theconversationproject.org. Jenna spoke about caregiver burnout and the importance of asking for help, reminding us that we don't have to do it all ourselves. We can build our support team, and that can include our family pet. And remember, asking for help, being vulnerable and honest, is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. Jenna stressed the importance of advocacy, both being our own advocate as well as having an advocate, even a social worker, especially as we build our community of support. And she spoke about practical supports, such as having a meal train during an illness or medical emergency. And we can check that out at mealtrain.com. Another practical support is the helpful resource that Jenna offers for free through her website, agingwithaplan.org. This handout is designed to help you prepare for your own medical emergencies. As Jenna said, we never know when we'll have a medical emergency, so we can start having these advanced care planning conversations sooner rather than later. And if you're in the midst of your own caregiving journey and need some supports, I invite you to tap into alongsidecaregiverconsulting.ca or Alongside Caregiver Consulting's Facebook page or Instagram account. If you'd like to share your story as a guest on the Island Treasures podcast, please contact me by email, either through my website or at alongsidecaregiverconsulting@shaw.ca. And thank you for tuning in today, and to Jenna Rumberger for sharing your caregiving story from a care recipient's perspective and the resources you have found so helpful along the way. If you don't want to miss future episodes, be sure to subscribe to the Island Treasures podcast. See you next episode.